Quick update here. We got back to Houston today. Fortunately, found a path back. Got a chance to come home. Everybody gets to see their families, their wives, their kids. So that's really good for the guys on the team. And had a chance to drive around a little bit to see some of the damage, to see some of the flooding. It's unbelievable. And obviously there's still so much work that needs to be done. There's still some areas that are flooded. Keep raising money. Keep spreading the word. Please keep sending the message out. UCaring.com/JJWatt. Can't speak enough to the goodness and humanity, to everybody helping out. We're working very hard to make sure that these funds go directly to the people. So many volunteers helping. Houston, stay strong. We're all behind you.
That was J.J. Watt. And of course, the last thing the people of Houston needed was this news. Reports this morning of 2 explosions at a chemical plant 25 miles outside of Houston. Arkema Inc. advertises everything from soil fumigation products to hydrogen peroxides on their website. One deputy sheriff was sent to the hospital after inhaling fumes. Meanwhile, Houston native and New Magic shooting guard Jonathan Simmons told the team's official website that he had to ride a boat, walk through muddy water, and ride on the back of a dumpster truck to get from his Houston high-rise to a friend's house in the suburbs. Once there, the group he was with, which included 8 children and 12 adults, ran out of food. Now, tonight's preseason NFL game between the Texans and Cowboys has been canceled. The Cowboys will hold a telethon in its place to raise money for the victims of the hurricane. Early estimates say the damage is upwards of $160 billion. Checking in on J.J. Watt's fundraising efforts on ucaring.com/JJWatt. The original goal was $200,000. They are approaching $9 million. Wow. And your heart just breaks for everyone in Houston. And the fundraising efforts have just been beyond. I'm sure it'll be $10 million probably by lunchtime today.
Yeah, obviously thoughts go out to anybody affected by this tragedy. And I commend everyone who is actually taking action to help those who really need help in this time. And hopefully the city of Houston and everybody affected is able to get safe and recover from this. Well, moving on to some news out of the sports world, it is official. Kyrie Irving is a member of the Boston Celtics. The Cavs received a 2020 second-round pick to finalize the deal, and Irving is expected to be introduced in a news conference tomorrow. Seems to me, Maggie, the second-round pick was a throw-in of sorts to get this deal done.
See, I see it as more than that, considering in the deal as it's, constituted right now, 2 of the cornerstones are second-round picks. Isaiah Thomas was the 60th pick. Jay Crowder was the 34th pick. So I'm not going to put that as just a throwaway, but I do believe that this was the best deal that Cleveland could have gotten and just got a little bit sweeter with that extra draft pick because it serves 2 goals. First, the immediate goal in getting some help defensively. Jay Crowder, obviously, going to be a big help there. We'll see what happens with Isaiah Thomas's hip. But then also long-term, now you not only have a first-round pick for next year, you have another second-rounder for 2020. That's also just little pawns that can be added in to other trade deals if indeed the Cavs want to keep dealing.
Well, of course, second-round picks have panned out before, but generally they're not those kind of players. And I think if you're Boston, when you hear the names that were being thrown out there, like Tatum, like Brown, they weren't going to budge in that regard. So in order to facilitate a deal to get Irving, they put that in there. As far as it being the best deal possible, I agree it is the best deal possible for the Cavaliers. There's an argument to be made that it's not the best deal possible for the Cavaliers with LeBron James, because the centerpiece of the deal could be the Brooklyn pick, and that may not have any impact on LeBron's career. And it's also very arguable that Jay Crowder winds up being the most important piece from this deal because of the versatility he provides the Cavs, because they needed a lot of defense, and because of the uncertainty of Isaiah Thomas's health.
However, if you were one of those Celtics fans who believe that the team gave up too much already to try to get Kyrie Irving, you're obviously not happy today.
I think you've been through that process already. I think it's done. Like, if you were upset about that, you've moved on enough where the second-round pick isn't going to break your back again.
So you're saying it's like stages of grief, and you've gotten to acceptance.
Yeah. And you're going to see Kyrie Irving wearing that number 11 in green, and you'll feel a little better about it.
Okay, well, Vontaze Burfict has to have some acceptance. His 5-game suspension reduced to 3 games. The suspension is the second longest in NFL history for an on-field infraction. The other was Albert Haynesworth stomping on a Cowboys lineman's head in 2006, but that was also not a football play. Robin, is this signaling a new era in the NFL where a suspension that many believe was actually borderline, well, now a hit like that will garner a suspension? Well,
one of the problems the NFL is dealing with, and maybe the biggest one, is player safety issues, right? So they have to be proactive, or, you hate to be cynical about it, at least look proactive about the way they're approaching this. So they have to look out for illegal hits, and they have to start punishing them, especially when there are guys with history. Because one of the murky territories here is intent. On the football field, they don't have the benefit of frame-by-frame analysis or replay, and part of the game is hitting the other guy and stopping the other guy. With Burfict, if I was looking at that one hit in isolation, I don't think it would be worthy of the 5-game suspension. But when you're looking at that one hit in combination with his repeated history of such transgression.
They're right there on the screen. It's a laundry list. We almost needed 2 pages of a graphic just to get everything in. Thanks for putting it back up. Because, okay, now you have the league. They've established a standard for personal conduct off the field. But what about a standard for suspensions for on-the-field infractions? Obviously, they have a schedule of monetary fines. If you have a certain hits, a chop block is $9,000, a low hit is $6,000, and they have it for first offense, and they have it for second offense. But they don't have it for 5th offense and 6th offense, which is what Vontaze Burfict is now in this territory. So I think that while, the players union will still appeal any kind of suspension, and they're going to have the players back to a certain degree, but I think that it would be smart for the NFL now to turn their attention to on the field in terms of unifying or trying to come up with a code for suspensions, not just fines.
Yeah, I think a uniform policy is the best defense here, because the NFL has had arbitrary suspensions in the past. I mean, you could joke there's like a spin wheel behind Roger Goodell that he spins and lands on a certain number of games. And it enters a slippery slope when you try to hypercritically analyze each one of these things, because then you start sort of power ranking transgressions, and that's difficult to do. So what I think the best thing to do is say, here is the policy, we are enforcing the policy, and therefore no one can blame you for being inconsistent. They may disagree with a particular individual instance, but they can't say that isn't the way you've handled it in the past.
The interesting thing, though, about even if you do have a policy, which I think would protect Goodell and a lot of people in the league, but you know that the appeal is going to be coming, and you expect that it would get reduced, just like in the way that Vontaze Burfict. So in some ways, it kind of like satisfies the league looking like the tough guys. They can say, hey, we're going to give you a 5-game suspension. We know the appeal's coming. We know that there's probably going to be a reduction in that, but at least we can look tough and we can look like we're handling our business.
That does seem to be the new pattern.
This is the trend.
The NFL comes down harsh because they know that they are going to lose on appeal. And I don't know how long that can continue either, because you can't play that volleying game over and over again. Aaron Rodgers is the latest and perhaps biggest name player to weigh in on Colin Kaepernick's job status, telling ESPN in a profile, quote, "I think he should be on a roster right now. I think because of his protests, he is not." Will this have any impact on the Kaepernick situation?
Not unless the Packers were planning on signing him. If Brett Hundley his job's in jeopardy, of course he's the backup to Aaron Rodgers, then I don't see this really having an effect, unfortunately, because I think if you are a general manager or an owner and you've already made up your mind that Kaepernick is not for you, either because of system or because of the protests, then I don't think Aaron Rodgers, or quite frankly anyone coming out and saying anything about it, will change your mind.
I wonder if there is a sense of a surge against the wall here, where one voice may not be enough, even if it's Aaron Rodgers, but when you have the protests against the NFL, when you have various players speaking out, when you have protests growing throughout the league, and then if more and more big-name players continue to come out and support, eventually does that break the door down and get past the deniability factor that some executives have? Because I get it. Some people are going to say he doesn't fit their team scheme and all that. But to me, it has gone past plausible when you see the players that have been signed and the guys that are starting for various teams.
I know that's such a difficult thing, though, about Kaepernick and why he doesn't have a job, is because I think teams can all say, and I feel like they can say with themselves, with a clear conscience and with confidence, if they don't believe he fits his system, then they think that is that is a good enough reason not to sign him. And I think that there are enough teams who will use that, whether it's the truth, whether it's an excuse. Nobody's going to come out and say, we're not going to sign him because he has these anthem protests, except for John Mara from the Giants, who said we got more emotional mail than anyone else on this. But I think it's just a very difficult thing to prove, with like tangible evidence that he is actually being denied a job because of the protests, even though it seems very obvious.
I mean, it seems like common sense to me. Of course, you're not probably going to have a paper trail or something along those lines. But if we were to conduct a survey, and of course, I don't have any official scientific method behind this, but you were to ask people who is the best quarterback that is not currently playing in the NFL, who has played in the NFL, I'm pretty sure the consensus would be Colin Kaepernick.
Okay, let's talk a little more about the NFL, but on a different scale. Zeke Elliott, well, it looks like, according to Adam Schefter, his 6-game suspension could be reduced. Schefter tweeting that this morning. Let's welcome aboard our legal expert, Michael McCann, been doing a lot of work on this case. Michael, Schefter's hearing it could be reduced from 6 games. What are you hearing?
Yeah, Maggie, I think to the extent that Elliott had a chance of succeeding in this hearing, it was never going to be getting the suspension vacated. It was going to be getting it reduced, because it's very difficult under NFL rules to challenge the league authority, particularly on issues where the commissioner has discretion. Certainly true here. So his best play, if you will, was really to go in there and focus on convincing Harold Henderson 6 games is too much for the proof and evidence that's been brought against me. How low of a reduction it is remains to be seen. But to me, I think it's a wise strategy to go into the hearing thinking, let's get it reduced.
If you were to make a prediction, how many games of a suspension do you believe Elliott will wind up serving?
It's hard to know, Robin, but my prediction would be 4 games. I think 4 games would be a reduction of the suspension. I think Henderson would be, obviously we're not in the room, so we don't know. We can't tell all sorts of things by not being there. But to go down to 2 games might strike some as being too low for domestic violence. Certainly there were criticisms of the NFL when Ray Rice originally had a 2-game suspension for a domestic violence matter. Now, some may say, well, there was video, here there isn't. I get that, but I think the NFL wants to be sensitive and mindful of how people value and the seriousness that they give to these types of allegations. So, again, hard to know, but if I had to guess, I would say 4 games.
Mike, if you were advising Zeke Elliott, and if the suspension was reduced from 6 games to 4, would you say the best course of action would be to sue for an injunction and try to, figure this out in court, or would it be better for Elliott to just serve the 4 games?
Well, I'm a lawyer, so my instinct is always, if you have a chance of fighting back, you should. But I think realistically here, the odds of going to court and getting an injunction are so low. Injunctions are seldom granted, and he would have to show, among other things, a high probability of success on the merits. I don't see how one could show that, given the discretion accorded to Commissioner Goodell under Article 46. In addition, he has to show irreparable harm. The NFL would say, even if you miss these games, we'll pay you back later on if ultimately you win a case. So honestly, I'm skeptical that going to court would be a wise move. Although, again, the downside is you go to court and lose. Maybe he just figures it's worth a shot, but he'd have to go into it knowing and being counseled that the odds of him succeeding would be extremely low.
Michael McCann, appreciate your expertise as always. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Maggie.
Well, months of preparation have all led to this. For the first time since the AP poll was created, the preseason #1 and #3 ranked teams are meeting in their opener. Phil Savage has spent a lifetime in football, both in NFL front offices and as a pro and college scout. He's also the executive director of the Reese's Senior Bowl and the color analyst for the Crimson Tide football games. But wait, there's more. He has written a new book called 4th and Goal Every Day. Let's go to Birmingham and talk to him. It comes your way courtesy of Toyota. Let's go places. That was a mouthful. Okay, Phil, this book is about Alabama and what Nick Saban's winning culture means. But in many ways, it's also about Bill Belichick, too. And we know that Saban was Belichick's defensive coordinator in Cleveland, but explain just how similar their football approach is.
Yeah, Maggie, in February of 2016, after Alabama had won their 4th national title, Ray Glear, who's the co-author with me, called and said, Sav, you grew up in the state of Alabama during the Bear Bryant era. You worked in Cleveland under Bill Belichick and Nick Saban when they were formulating what we've seen come to life here in New England and Tuscaloosa. And he said, now you've been the color analyst for 4 national titles. You should write a book and link all those things together. But you're exactly right. In Cleveland in the early 1990s, I was on the coaching staff originally before I moved to scouting, but we ended up with 6 future head coaches and 6 general managers on that staff. We had 1 winning season in 5 years, and so winning is difficult. And to see what both Bill has achieved in New England and Nick now in Alabama, I mean, you're really talking about, at least in this generation, the 2 greatest coaches of this era for both pro and college, and we were all together in those early days with the original Browns.
Okay, your book is called 4th and Goal Every Day, but describe what the book is.
Well, the book was the methodology that the Dallas Cowboys used going back to the early 1960s. Tom Landry was the head coach, Tex Schramm was the president of the team, and Gil Brandt was the personnel director. And what happened is that in 1989, when Jerry Jones bought the Cowboys, of course, he famously let those 3 gentlemen go. Gil Brandt was serving really as a consultant to a lot of different teams. But after 1 season in Berea, 1991, we really did not have a so-called evaluation system in place. So Bill and Michael Lombardi, who was the personnel director at the time, brought Gil in the spring of 1992, and he began introducing the concepts of the way the Cowboys had done business over the years. And that really is sort of the roots of the evaluation that system that is used in New England and Baltimore and numerous teams around the league. But probably most importantly, Nick Saban took a facsimile, the skeleton of it, to Michigan State, ultimately to LSU. He's perfected it and now has put it in place at Alabama. And, of course, they do an incredible job, Maggie. People talk about college football. They say recruiting, and Alabama's phenomenal at recruiting players, but they're even better at evaluating. And that's the real distinction between Alabama and most everyone else, is they have not only the best coach in the game, but they have one of the best evaluators in the game in terms of Nick Saban.
And describe the philosophy here. We know that Saban grades players on a scale 1 through 6, yet he says he'd rather have a 4 that could turn into a 6 than have a 5. Why is that?
Yeah, basically, not to get caught up in the numbers too much, there's an approach out there that really goes across the whole NFL. There's a thought that, okay, if a player is what he is, it's going to be hard to really change or improve him. So sometimes you're better off taking a player that has more upside. He may be more raw in terms of the natural talent, but he just doesn't have the technique and the fundamentals down yet. And that's another area where Alabama is incredibly successful. They've taken some 3-star recruits and turned them into 4- and 5-star players on the field. And so part of the book talks about how each player has their own individual timeline. Some of these kids can come in and contribute and start as true freshmen. Others need 2 or 3 years of incubation time in the system before they're ready for prime time. And that's why Alabama truly has a complete program, because they can take the elite of the athletes and maximize what they bring to the table, but then they can also take players that maybe are not quite as developed and really train them into their methodology, and those guys become productive as well.
Phil, Nick Saban is all about the minute details. You compare him to John Wooden, who famously told his players how to put their socks on correctly, UCLA. What's the smallest detail that Saban has either pointed out to you, players, or coaches, something that you thought you wouldn't have even noticed if he hadn't pointed it out?
Well, interestingly enough, when we were all at the Browns back in the early 90s, defensive backs are notorious for wanting to wear multiple wristbands and towels and everything else hanging off of them. And Nick Saban, as the defensive secondary coach and the defensive coordinator, he wanted their jerseys tucked in. He wanted everyone to be in uniform. And that's really what happens at Alabama. I mean, there's not a lot of flash with stuff hanging all off the guys. I mean, their uniforms are tucked in. They wear it appropriately. So that's something that he thinks is really important in terms of building a team culture, the team concept. The other thing that he does incredibly well, Maggie, is his management of time. He can compartmentalize things better than anybody that I've ever seen. When it's time to get ready for Florida State, he's ready. When it's time to get ready to go recruiting, he's on it. When it's time to go talk to the alumni groups or visit with the president or the athletic director, he's able to manage all those things. And the most amazing thing about him, in my mind, is that in 1991, he was responsible for the defense and the secondary. And that was it. He coached a certain way. This afternoon, when Alabama goes on the practice field for the final time before they play Florida State, he'll be coaching on that field exactly like he did back in 1991, with the exception that he's also responsible for the media, for managing up to the school administration, for strength and conditioning, academics, all of the things that go with being a head coach at a place like Alabama, and yet he's kept both hands firmly on the wheel of his football team, and not everybody can do that. I mean, there's a handful of people that coach football that can manage all of those things, and so that's, to me, what really makes him remarkable.
It's Nick Saban's world. We're all just living in it, Phil, especially down in Tuscaloosa. Okay, you have now been giving Nick Saban scouting reports since you took on that analysis job calling games. 111 Alabama games you have given reports to. So let's get your scouting report on Florida State. What do you have for us?
Well, Florida State brings back 9 starters on defense, plus their do-everything safety and Derwin James, who missed 10 games last year, plus Nate Andrews, who's been a very good player for them. He was hobbled last year and missed 9 games himself. So they get all that defensive talent back. I really expect this to be a defensive-oriented game. I don't think either coach wants to throw the game away in the first quarter. So that makes it a 45-minute contest. And I think with what Alabama is going to do defensively and some of their new talent and based on their tradition and with what Florida State has, this is going to be a disjointed kind of game, at least in my view. I don't see either offense just going up and down the field, but I see some pictures of DeAndre Francois. He was the ACC Rookie of the Year last season, 20 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. The thing that's difficult about Florida State, Maggie, offensively, is that they have a comprehensive system. So they could come out in a base personnel and try to run the ball, but then they can jump into 4 wides and throw it all over the lot. And Jimbo Fisher will probe and try to explore those different avenues early in a game until he figures out what he can dial up that'll actually work against the defense. So Bama's going to have to use their abilities to adjust in this game. It'll be a challenge in that regard, but FSU's extremely talented. They think they're a really good team. And the other thing I would say is that Jimbo Fisher, having worked with Nick Saban for 5 years down at LSU, he will know exactly what it takes from a mental and physical standpoint, from a toughness mentality of what it takes to not only compete with Alabama, but to try and beat them.
Phil Savage is the author of the new book, 4th and Goal Every Day, about Alabama football and Nick Saban. Also a lot about Bill Belichick in there. Love the scouting reports that you add in the back of the book, Phil. Very illuminating for people who are fans of the game. And thanks for letting us pick your brain today.
Well, thank you. I promise you my scouting notes are like cliff notes compared to what the real coaches are doing, but there's a bit of superstition here. Alabama, 100 wins, 11 losses since we started doing it. So that report went to Tuscaloosa Sunday night. I can assure you of that.
It's pretty good winning percentage there, Phil. I'm sure you like that. Have fun at the game this weekend. Alabama and Florida State. We'll all be watching.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
Can we get this out of the way? If Giancarlo Stanton hits more than 61 home runs this season, that will not be considered the all-time record. I'm tired of people saying this. Records aren't considered. They are. These things are not subjective. Just ask Merriam-Webster. A record is an account of an act or occurrence kept in writing or other permanent form. It isn't your personal playlist. The record for most home runs in a Major League Baseball season is 73 by Barry Bonds. Not liking that doesn't change it. I get it. Some don't want to recognize a player from the steroid era. Too bad. It is a chapter in baseball history. No one is asking you to swipe right on his picture or frame his baseball card. Besides, there may never have been an era that was truly clean. Speculation is the balls are juiced right now. And let's not act like Bonds isn't deserving. He's certainly the best player I've ever seen. Bonds was the best before cheating, and he was the best at cheating. Early in his career, he was better than Ken Griffey Jr. Later in his career, he was better than Babe Ruth. As for the current comparison, Stanton already has more at-bats this season than Bonds did in his record-setting year. So sorry, 73 isn't going next to Reggie Bush's Heisman in the vacated trophy room. The idea is insulting to anyone who witnessed what it was like to see the home run record actually fall. And it is insulting to anyone with access to Google. 62 is not more than 73, no matter how much someone wants it to be. They say records are meant to be broken, but that happens through achievement, not feelings. So if you were feeling like it, don't at me. If all goes well for the United States men's national team over the next 2 games, the path to the 2018 World Cup in Russia will be clear. The team hosts Costa Rica in World Cup qualifying Friday night in New York before hitting the road to face Honduras on Tuesday. And joining us to preview these matches is former U.S. player Taylor Twellman. Taylor, let's break down first the big matchup. Some people are saying arguably the biggest one for the national team here in New York. Obviously, the last time they played Costa Rica in World Cup qualifying, it didn't go so well, 4-0. What do you expect this time around?
Well, I think once the United States lost at home in Columbus to Mexico, this game in New York became the most important and most difficult of World Cup qualifiers. And some people say, well, what about Mexico and Azteca? You're playing with house money. So the fact that they went down to Mexico, got a point, it still makes this the most important game remaining in World Cup qualifying because Costa Rica is a threat. You mentioned it. They beat the United States 4-0 at home, but on the road, they're a difficult opponent to play against. They defend very well. They make life very difficult for the United States. We should have a good one on Friday night.
I've noticed a tonal shift around the team where for a while it was almost like U.S. soccer's on the rise. Then it felt like that was halted, at least the sense was that way. And now it feels like it's on the rise again. Is that the coaching change from Klinsmann to Arena? What would you put as the impetus for that? What are the reasons?
Well, I think you have to give Bruce Arena a ton of credit because obviously he's righted the ship and he hasn't even lost yet. So obviously they're in good form under Bruce Arena. He's brought the group together. In saying that, I think people overreacted to losing the first 2 games. I know that's the first time the United States had done that in a long, long time. But the reality is Mexico at home, at Costa Rica, are 2 of your 3 hardest games you have to play in World Cup qualifying. So you lose the first 2. It was the way they lost, 4-0, where it looked like the team really had nothing going for each other. They didn't look like they were on the same page. But I didn't think it was as dire as people made it. But it does put pressure on the remaining games of World Cup qualifying. The United States have done well in the 4 games under Bruce Arena, but they still have to finish the job with the remaining 4 games. The tonal shift, yeah, okay, fine, but I don't think it's much different than it was before Jurgen Klinsmann was fired because the reality is this. They're good in CONCACAF, but when Russia comes around in 6-7 months from now, are they good enough to beat Belgium, Argentina, Colombia, and the Brazils of the world in the round of 16? That question still remains for me.
Well, tangibly then, how do you think this roster stacks up to rosters of the past? Do you think it is one of the better U.S. teams?
I think it's a deeper U.S. team. I'm not sure it's one of the better ones because I think it's more difficult for me to assess what was going on in 1990, 94, 98. But from my point of view, when I look at the 2014 World Cup roster to the 2018 potential World Cup roster, it's very similar to me. The only difference is all of us want to talk about Christian Pulisic, and rightfully so, because there's an American 18-year-old kid playing consistently for a Champions League team in Germany. So all of us want to look at him as the savior of U.S. soccer, the Messi, if you will. Pulisic's a special player. They're deep on the back line, but I'm not sure it's better than years past.
Fans saw Clint Dempsey in a super sub role for the Gold Cup knockout stage. Is he going to be in a permanent bench role? Can he be convinced of that? Or do you think he needs to move back into the starting 11?
Well, I tweeted during the Gold Cup that I think the best accomplishment or the best thing coming out of the Gold Cup for Bruce Arena is most likely convincing Clint Dempsey if he wants to play in Russia, he's got to be a super sub. Father Time is undefeated, so it's not a knock on Clint Dempsey, but at this stage of his career, the last 20 to 25 minutes of games, when it slows down a little bit, fatigue is set in for the opposition, I'd make an argument that Clint Dempsey could be the most valuable player for the United States in those moments. But you have to convince him that. I think the Gold Cup did that. I think it's the most important thing Bruce Arena got out of the Gold Cup.
Now, you got something going on with the U.S. Soccer Girls and Boys Development Academy for Concussion Awareness Week. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's been something I've been working on for a long, long time. And so the United States Soccer Development Academy, it's a little more than 17,000 boys and girls, will take the Think Taylor Pledge, which is my foundation that I started about 5-6 years ago after my injury. And it's basically just calling young athletes and their parents and coaches to take ownership of their bodies. And the most important thing that the United States has done over the last 3 or 4 years is this Recognize to Recover program. It's the first of its kind. It's about players' health and players' safety. And 99% of that is regarding head injuries. So September 2nd through the 10th, those 17,000 plus kids will take the TT Pledge. And I can promise you one thing, if our athletes are more educated at a younger age, we'll make a bigger difference and see more progression, particularly in traumatic brain injuries, than any other way.
Good stuff. Appreciate it, Taylor.
No problem,
Thank you for the time.
Thanks for coming.
Yesterday, Villanova coaching legend Rollie Massimino died following a long battle with cancer. Massimino won more than 800 college basketball games and led the Wildcats to the national title in 1985. Joining us to discuss his legacy is former Sacramento King and a player under Rollie at Villanova, Harold Pressley. Harold, thank you for joining us. And when you first heard the news, what was your initial thought and reaction?
Well, I actually was I was with him earlier in his New Jersey shore home, followed by I was there on Sunday, Monday to be with him. So I knew what was going on, but it's still, tough to take. The great news is he was prepared. He was ready, and he did it his way. He went out his own way. He knew that he was dying, and he still had fun, and he still was the epitome of God's second commandment, just love thy neighbor. He just did everything for everybody. It's amazing. You look back, and I'm looking at Massimino at the airport, and somebody runs up to him, and they say, "Hey, Coach, I don't know you, but great game." 3 minutes later, the guy would say, "Wow, I'm really close friends with Rollie Massimino. He just gave me his cell phone." He made everybody feel awesome all the time.
Wow, thanks for sharing that story. And I've heard that before, that Rollie had that way where as soon as you got into his orbit, you were part of his world. And I know it's a moment you've been asked about a lot, but Villanova's upset of Georgetown in 1985 was historic. The perfect game. Of course, your photograph next to Rollie, the iconic photograph. What do you, though, remember about Rollie in that moment?
That was just precious. This is a guy who worked hard. As a matter of fact, I coached with him at Cleveland State, and his motto was, if you want to be the best, you have to outwork the rest. And that's what came to me, was he just wouldn't let it die. It was just keep going and work harder and find a way. He always said, we've got to find a way to win. And there's going to be a moment in the game where it could go either way. Do your thing to find that way. Be prepared to win. Just a special guy. Unbelievable. Yeah.
If you were to sum up the impact and the mark he left on basketball, what do you think it would be?
It truly was to treat everyone like they were special. It wasn't so much about being on the basketball court. It was being a great person and just being there for others. That's what he really was all about. And of course, his basketball mind was brilliant. I had him and Jay Wright out for a coach's clinic here in Sacramento a few years back, and 7 o'clock in the morning, and I go to pick them both up, and they're at the table exchanging plays, diagramming plays, and Coach Mass says to Jay, that is a great play. Wow, where did you get that from? Jay Wright turns over and said, I got it from you 20 years ago. I mean, he's just a genius. Bill Russell one day, we walk into this room with all these Hall of Famers, and Bill Russell looks up and sees Massimino, and he just starts screaming, the genius, the genius. And Coach Mass says, Bill, why are you calling me the genius? He says, you won a national championship with Presley and Pickney on the team. You had to be a genius. When Bill Russell coached both Ed Pickney and I for the Kings, Sacramento Kings, back in the 80s, and just hysterical.
That's just amazing, and thank you for sharing those stories with us. I know even though Rollie Massimino lived such an incredibly long and filled life, but it's still never easy when that final day happens. So thank you so much for joining us, Harold, and sharing your thoughts on the legendary coach. He was one of a kind.
Yes, he was. Thank you for having me.
Harold, thank you. And that's where we're going to leave the show today. Thank you for watching. Of course, we will see you tomorrow to wrap up the week.